A group of ghost children were standing in a circle, holding hands, singing, "Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." Welcome to Paranormal Christian. Let's tell stories. So I've got a banger for you today. I have shared in the past on other episodes that the house that I grew up in, the house I was born into, I was born in 1981. And so this is the house that I lived in for most of my life until I was about 22 or 23 years old. This was not a home that had been in our family. However, oddly enough, my great-grandmother, my dad's grandma, she had also lived in this house for a few years. Incredible history to this house, and it has given us a lot of stories, strange things that have happened that we cannot explain. You know, my grandma told me stories when I was a little boy, how many people get to be close with their great-grandma. So when I was a little boy, she lived on the next street over. There were some woods behind our house. And when I would come home from school, from kindergarten, I could actually walk through that little patch of woods and I would be at my grandma's house. And my grandma would tell me incredible things. And she said she remembered bad winter when ice was covering the road, and she remembered some of her neighbors that had a horse-drawn wagon. And she watched as the horses were slipping and sliding and trying to pull the wagon up that hill. She also remembers another time where some people were trying to pull, I guess with horses, a cannon up that hill. And she told me it was somehow in connection to Civil War kind of stuff, which would have been from years before, but it was some kind of a military something. I don't know what it was. But anyway, she lived in that house for a while. So the house has quite a history and a lot of strange things surrounding it. I should also mention to you that when you would walk out the front door of that house, there was a sidewalk, or I guess really I should call it a center walk, because it went from the porch straight out through the middle of the yard to the street. There was also a sidewalk that went off the side of the porch to the driveway. Now, at some point, when I was probably, 7 or 8 years old, my mom and dad decided they did not want those concrete sidewalks going through the yard. They wanted it all to be yard. And so we busted up the sidewalks and we got rid of the concrete. Now, it was very interesting because as we got into the ground, we found old horseshoes. And we would always find old glass bottles. You know, kids like to dig up the yard. We would always find glass bottles and old nails and things like this. But on that day, when we were digging up the ground, I guess to smooth it out, underneath that sidewalk that went straight out to the street, we found a tombstone. There was a tombstone just a few inches down under where the sidewalk was. It was a tombstone made in a brick. And how I wish we would have saved it. Why we did not save it makes no sense to me. We did not dig down any further. Of course, the implication is that there was at least one person buried in our yard, in that front lawn. I would love to have that information today, but I do not. That house supplied us with so many strange stories, but I've got to tell you one today. The basement of that house was not a finished basement. The basement, you had to go outside and around to the backyard to use an outside entrance to go into that basement. And it was a real basement-y basement. It was cold. It was damp. It was nearly impossible to seal because at different times we tried. And so the walls were always moist. And my dad had some shelves down there where he would keep, paint. If we had a little leftover paint from painting the house or whatever the case, that's where we kept the deep freeze. We had a deep freezer down there, and we could go down and get, frozen pizza, popsicle in the summer, these sorts of things. And at some point, I got into model trains, and I know what point that was. I was about 11 years old when I got into model trains. This was around 93, 94. I was 11 or 12, and so maybe 92-ish. So my dad actually did a wonderful, wonderful thing for any parent to do, an amazing thing. He went in and he built a wall across half of that basement. He sealed, to the best of our ability, sealed that inner part beyond the wall. He carpeted it. He put in walls and painted it bright and put in good lighting. And we had an old couch, I think was my grandma and grandpa's, and he put the couch in there and a TV stand with don't I have the best dad? I want to tear up talking about my dad. The best dad in the whole world. And he built me a table for my model trains. Well, this became the hangout for me and my cousins and for me and all of my friends. And we wanted to spend the night down there. It was cool. It was like an apartment. It was our own place. And so we would go down there, especially on the weekends, or we were down there all the time in the summer. We would order pizza, popcorn. We would run the model trains. That was fun. We would watch movies, and a grand time was had by all. But one particular night, something very strange happened. It was myself. I was there, of course. My best friend, Robert, and my cousin, Philip. And a lot of my stories are about Robert, Philip, my best friend, Matt. I had two best friends, depending on what portion of life you're talking about. And so we were involved. We were always there. On this night, it was Robert and Philip and I, and we were sleeping in the basement in my little model train apartment. Now, it was the middle of the night. It was quite late. It would have been well after midnight, and it was quiet. I don't know if we had turned the movie off that we were watching or whatever the case. And we heard something. We heard some children playing in my yard. We couldn't believe, why would kids be up this late, and why would they be in our yard? Robert and Philip were both a couple or 3 years older than me. I was 11 or 12, and so they were 2 to 3 years older than that. And so we stopped, we got quiet and listened. And we listened, and what we heard, it sounded like a group of children that were singing, get this, how many of you heard the song? Ring around the rosies, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. And in which case, you would all drop. I don't know if you ever played this game. If you research the history of it, it's rather cryptic. It deals with a plague going through that actually took the lives of a whole lot of children, and how the skin would become ash-like, and then they fell down. And so, strange thing to have a singing game about. But as we listened, we came out of the back portion where the apartment was into the scary basement portion, and it's getting louder as we approach my backyard. It's getting louder as we approach the door to the basement. And we can hear them, and we're thinking, this is so strange. And you can picture it in your mind, these kids standing in a circle, holding hands, singing this strange, bizarre, scary song. Now, in your mind's eye, if you're anything like me, they are also dressed era appropriate. You think about the type of clothing that they would be wearing to be singing this song. I'll tell you something that makes this extra strange, is that just about a quarter of a mile from that house I grew up in, and I'm only about a quarter of a mile from it right now where I sit, there is a popular graveyard in our area called Gibson's Graveyard. And many, many, many of the graves in Gibson's Graveyard are from the smallpox epidemic, which happened early in the 1900s, and it killed a lot of children, a lot of babies, that their system could not handle smallpox. And there was, of course, no vaccine at the time. And so you see a lot of headstones up there. Most of them you can't see anymore. The graves are sunk in and things are grown up. A lot of people in our area don't even know that the place is there. You've got to go across some private property to get into Gibson's Graveyard. And so it's kind of a strange situation. There are also graves surrounded by fences, spiked fences. The reason for the spiked fences was to keep the vampire out from getting into the babies' graves, or to keep one vampire from coming out of his grave if he came back to life. This is a story for another time. Gibson's Graveyard is also called the Vampire Graveyard, and I'll tell that in another episode. But for right now, we want to focus on the fact that my house was very near this graveyard, which is centered around a smallpox epidemic of children. So on this night in the early 90s, we hear children singing in my backyard, and it sounds like they're singing, "Ashes, ashes, we all fall down." Now, we don't know why those kids are there in my yard, so what do? You scare them. So Robert and Philip and I, we are approaching the door. We're getting closer because we don't want them to notice that we are coming. We were going to throw the door open and jump out, rah, and run at these kids and scare them. We're going to scare the pants off of them and run them out of our yard. Why are these kids playing in my yard in the middle of the night singing this weird song? It's creepy. And so we get closer and closer to the door. We can hear them singing. It gets clearer and clearer. It gets louder and louder. We're almost there. We're getting ready to jump out and scare them. We turn the doorknob. We throw the door open. Nobody's in the yard. There's nothing to hear. It went dead silent. We can't hear it inside. We cannot hear it outside. It's gone. It's over. There are no children. What did Robert hear that Philip heard, that I heard? A ghost never crossed our mind. We never considered anything weird or supernatural. We just thought it was kind of strange and creepy, and we were going to scare these kids. It never crossed our mind that it was anything other than some kids in the yard. But there weren't. There were no kids in the yard. And the moment we opened that door, all of the sound stopped completely. To this day, I don't have an explanation. Was it something supernatural? I have no idea. I have no way of knowing that. I know that the circumstances were very, very strange. I think it's very bizarre. I think it's weird for this to have happened. What do you think we heard? What do you think happened? Do you have a similar story? Have you ever encountered a voice that you couldn't figure out where it came from? Strange singing that came from another time in history? Do you have anything like this? We would love to hear your story. Would you subscribe right now wherever you're watching Paranormal Christian? Would you follow us so that you get alerts when we release a new video or if we ever go live? And we want to hear from you. And so comment below what you think happened. What do you think we experienced? Also comment with your own stories, or you can send us your stories by going to paranormalchristian.com. Would you visit the website, click the contact button, fill out the form, and let us hear from you. You will also find a merch page. You can get a coffee mug, a Paranormal Christian coffee mug or tumbler to drink your coffee from while you listen to these stories. You can get a hoodie just like the one I'm wearing, or a lot more great stuff. And so thank you for joining us today. Keep the stories coming and keep them PC. We'll see you next time on Paranormal Christian.